After the deadly shootings in Colorado, Americans have been trying to understand who James Holmes is and why he opened fire in a crowded theater.
The family says they will stand by their son as his lawyers plan their strategy for his trial. Ephraim Graham has the story.
On paper, James Holmes had it all together. An intelligent young man studying neuroscience in a PhD program at the University of Colorado.
He was a top student. Everything that he did, he excelled in academically.
I remember him as a very smart, humorous individual.
He grew up in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. His mother is a nurse, his father a mathematician.
He was a little bit on the quiet side. In one-on-one conversation, it was obvious he was an intelligent young man, and he had some goals. He was going to be professional.
But police say James Holmes walked into the Aurora, Colorado theater and opened fire. He wore body armor, dyed his hair red, even wore a mask and goggles. Holmes is suspected of shooting 70 people. 12 died from their injuries. A spokesman for the Holmes family says they will stand by their son while sending condolences to the victims and promising to work with police.
I mean, their hearts go out to all of the victims and their families. They really want everybody to respect their privacy. It's a very, very sad day. They're, working with and communicating with authorities, and really that's all we can say for right now.
Damiani stressed the importance of letting this case play out in the courtroom and not in the media. That courtroom process began Monday, and that first glimpse of Holmes left a disturbing image.
Well, in looking at him today at the hearing, I found it very interesting the way that his eyes were rolling, how he tried to open them up, how he looked like he might have been nodding off a little bit. And it struck me that this is a person who's been through an emotional maelstrom and therefore might be totally wiped out emotionally. There could be some sort of a psychotic process going on, and we see that being acted out there. Or there might be some malingering going on. In other words, trying to make himself look worse than he actually is. Or maybe a combination of all of those things.
Some victims and their families were in court. Many chose not to attend. 16-year-old Justin Davis decided to go back and finish the movie that was cut short for him and so many others. And when it comes to James Holmes, Justin says his faith leaves him only one option.
We should just forgive. And you don't know what he's going through. You don't know why he did it.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Well, we're all going to be wondering for a long time why this young man did this, but it looks like he tried to imitate a comic book villain and act out in a very real way what he was reading in comic books and what he was seeing in movies. And how we process that going forward, I really don't have any answers on this one. Wendy Griffith has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Wendy?
Thanks, Gordon. Coptic Christians are the largest Christian community in the Middle East, and that makes them a target for violence and discrimination in countries like Egypt. As John Jessup tells us, that's especially true for Coptic Christian women.
Last year's protests in Cairo's Tahrir Square inspired hopes for freedom. 1 year later, freedom seems even more elusive for Egypt's Coptic Christians, who've seen their churches burned and community abused. The voice you hear belongs to a young woman, a Coptic Christian, who came here seeking asylum.
I kept asking myself, what if this man hadn't saved me? Where would I be now?
She testified to a congressional committee from behind a wall to conceal her identity and to protect her family back in Egypt. The faceless woman, referred to as Anne, gives voice to women who've disappeared, never to be heard from again, recounting how a man tried to kidnap her last year.
I was screaming. I didn't know what he wanted. I had no idea why he was doing this.
Anne managed to escape, but many times the victims do not. According to a new report, the number of disappearances and abductions among Coptic women is on the rise, all with the goal of converting women to Islam.
I don't care who's in the White House, Democrat or Republican, when women are being abused, when anybody's human rights are being abused, there should be no partisanship.
Congressman Chris Smith is trying to make this a public concern. At the hearing, he highlighted the report and challenged the U.S. government to do more.
It's a war of attrition, against the Christians, using the women as scapegoats.
The report's author says while most cases include kidnapping, abuse, and forced marriages, some radicals use the lure of love and romance.
They go, they make the girls fall in love with them. He gets one, she's married off, goes out, recruits another, gets her, goes out, recruits another. The same name was cited in 5 separate police reports.
Some experts believe this is part of a wider campaign to impose an Islamist agenda.
The practices of abducting, torturing, and forcing conversions on Coptic women or any element of society is a terrorist act.
In the last year, the number of asylum petitions has skyrocketed, and the U.S. is granting more requests to people like Anne, who's grateful, however, can't help but feel a tinge of guilt.
Until today, when I think about it, I thank God that I was saved. But then I wonder about the others that weren't saved. What happened to them?
John Jessup, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
The Massachusetts pastor kidnapped in Egypt has safely returned home. The congregation was on hand to celebrate as Reverend Michael Lewis and church member Lisa Alphonse arrived at Boston's Logan International Airport. Both were taken hostage from their church's tour bus on July 13th. The kidnapper said he took them because Egyptian authorities had jailed his uncle. He set them free after authorities promised to work on releasing his relative. Lewis and Alphonse were then able to reunite with their church group in Israel. Well, most Americans blame Washington for the weak economy. That's according to a new poll from TheHill.com. 34% say President Obama bears the most responsibility, followed by Congress at 23%. Wall Street gets 20% of the blame, and former President Bush with 18%. 53% say the president's policies have slowed the economy down, and 42% say he's taken the right actions. The federal government is on its way to yet another annual deficit over $1 trillion. The Congressional Budget Office predicts the deficit will come in just under $1.2 trillion, and the total national debt is now just under $16 trillion. President Obama and Republicans remain divided over how to bring the annual deficit down. The president says he wants spending cuts along with higher taxes on high-income Americans. The Republicans opposed that tax increase and want to focus on spending cuts. Gordon?
Well, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any compromise anytime soon, and all the pundits are talking about the fiscal cliff we face at the end of this year, where some automatic cuts go into place, primarily aimed at our military, and then the Bush tax cuts go away. So we'll have a tax increase and a big chop at the Pentagon budget coming up as soon as December. But I call it the tyranny of the trillion. And when you start looking at how long it's going to take to pay off $16 trillion, you kind of start scratching your head and saying, we're not really debating the right thing. Under the tax increases that are being proposed, the math just doesn't work out. You can enact that and you still haven't solved the deficit problem. You can get rid of all discretionary spending at the federal government level, and you still haven't solved the deficit problem. Until we get at what are the requirements for food stamps, what are the requirements for Medicare, Medicaid, until we start talking seriously about increasing the age of retirement on Social Security. It's those kinds of programs that seem to be increasing, where now you have a majority of the population in the United States getting some form of benefit directly from the federal government. That creates political problems. That's certainly creating deficit problems. And are we on our way to becoming another Greece?
A federal court has ruled 2 Wisconsin high schools violated the Constitution by holding graduation at a church. Brookfield Central and Brookfield East High Schools both held graduation services at Elmbrook Church. A group of students and parents argued holding the ceremonies there violated the separation of church and state. Monday, the 7th Circuit Court reversed a previous court decision that the schools did nothing wrong. The court said students were exposed to religious messages by the giant cross in the church sanctuary and religious pamphlets and hymnals in the pews. Missouri's Roman Catholic bishops are urging voters to approve a state constitutional amendment allowing public prayer. The proposed amendment to the state's constitution asserts the right to pray in public as long as it does not disturb the peace.
It also says students may express their religious beliefs and cannot be compelled to participate in assignments that violate those beliefs. The bishops say the amendment is needed because religious values are increasingly, quote, becoming marginalized in our society. The vote is scheduled on August 7th. Well, you can always get the latest news from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.